Back in the UK and I'm already fucking depressed.
I am severely depressed.
I need to go back.
I just want to say big up America, man.
Not many people walking around London with a smile on their face.
I'm missing the flavours, okay? Us Brits aren't used to flavouring and spices, right? My palate changed.
In the flat right now to go back to the UK. Fuck.
I'll be real, I don't want to leave.
So I'm back in the UK and I'm already fucking depressed.
If you couldn't tell already by this absolutely miserable weather, this is what a typical summer's day looks like over here.
Do you think a country with strip malls, gas station coffee, and a healthcare bill that can bankrupt a family doesn't deserve to be called a world leader? That's the question a lot of Europeans arrived with this summer, and it's the exact question a lot of them left without an answer for. Because reality, as usual, didn't care what anyone assumed going in. If you want more videos like this one, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is only the first stop on a much bigger journey through what actually happened when Europe finally showed up on American soil for World Cup 2026. For years, the narrative out of parts of Europe was simple and a little smug. America is loud, unhealthy, dangerous, culturally shallow, and obsessed with size for the sake of size. Then thousands of fans, journalists, and casual tourists actually landed in Atlanta, Dallas, Kansas City, and a dozen other host cities. And the story that came back home looked almost nothing like the one they'd been telling each other for a decade. What follows isn't one person's opinion. It's a synthesis of hundreds of reaction videos, travel vlogs, forum threads, and on-the-ground interviews that surfaced over just a few months. And taken together, they tell a strange, funny, occasionally humbling story about what happens when assumption meets asphalt. Start with the thing nobody expects to be moved by: strangers. A Scottish supporter traveling through the Midwest posted about a moment at a diner where his card was declined. And before he could even sort it out, another customer at the counter had already paid the tab and walked out without waiting to be thanked. That kind of thing, according to the traveler, simply doesn't happen back home, not because people are unkind, but because the social contract is different. A German fan documented something similar outside a stadium in Kansas City, where a local family invited a group of visiting supporters back to a tailgate, fed them, gave them team gear, and refused to accept $1 for any of it. It wasn't performative. Nobody was filming for likes. It was just what people did.
You're literally waking up still thinking you're in this amazing, beautiful country where you've just been going around living your best life.
I just want to be allowed in, man. Someone call up Donald. Get us a green card, please.
I just want to say a massive, massive thank you to everyone in this great state.
Law enforcement became its own recurring theme, which surprised almost everyone going in, given how safety and policing in America gets discussed abroad. A Dutch tourist filmed an officer outside a Dallas venue cracking jokes with a line of fans waiting to get in, taking photos and generally behaving like part of the atmosphere rather than a threat looming over it. An English fan separately described how, after getting turned around downtown at 1 a.m., the first police cruiser he flagged down didn't just point him in a direction. The officer walked him 2 blocks to make sure he found his hotel. A French couple recorded a similar moment in Miami, where officers helped direct a lost group of tourists using a mix of broken French and hand gestures, laughing the whole way through. None of this erases the country's real and well-documented safety statistics, and it shouldn't be read that way. But on the ground, in the specific bubble of these host cities during the tournament, the lived experience for a huge number of visitors was warmth, not menace. Would you rather live somewhere colder but more private, or somewhere louder but more open? because that's the trade-off a lot of these travelers found themselves actually weighing for the first time, out loud, on camera, mid-trip. Then there's scale, which is where the jokes always start, and where a surprising number of travelers admitted the jokes stopped landing pretty fast. A Swedish visitor walked into a Buc-ees off a Texas highway expecting a gas station and found something closer to a small airport terminal, dozens of fuel pumps, a wall of brisket, a bathroom nicer than some European hotel rooms, and a parking lot bigger than his entire hometown's central square. A separate group of English fans filmed themselves inside an American supermarket, visibly stunned by an entire aisle dedicated to cereal, a rotisserie chicken section the size of a small European butcher shop, and shopping carts that looked built for moving furniture rather than groceries. The trucks got their own reaction reel. A German fan parked next to a full-size American pickup and joked that his rental car could fit in the bed of it with room to spare. Stadiums extended the theme. A first-time visitor from the Netherlands walked into one of the tournament's larger American venues and described a seating bowl so vast that the upper deck felt like its own separate building, connected to the field only by sound. Highways added another layer. An Italian tourist driving between host cities filmed himself passing exit after exit with barely another car in sight, remarking that back home, this much open road simply doesn't exist outside of a handful of stretches, and even those are usually told bumper to bumper. None of this is subtle messaging. It's just what unmistakably large infrastructure looks like when you've never stood next to it before. Nature did something different to people than infrastructure did. It didn't make them laugh. It made them go quiet.
Talk about post-New York depression and coming back to London. Yay! So I just spent 4 months in New York and had the best 4 months of my life. Let me tell you the hardest thing I found about coming back to London. The people. The people in New York, they're so welcoming within your first conversation. People say that New Yorkers aren't nice, but they've never been to London. They're just comparing it to the rest of America. And when you speak to someone for the first time, they welcome you with open arms and they ask you where you're from and they engage in conversation and push you further. So
a Scottish couple driving from a host city out toward a national park described losing cell signal for hours and realizing, maybe for the first time, what genuine wilderness at scale actually feels like, as opposed to the curated, signposted nature trails common across much of Western Europe. A French traveler crossing 3 time zones in a single cross-country drive said it finally clicked why Americans talk about their country the way they do, not out of arrogance necessarily, but because the sheer physical size reframes everything, from how far close means to how big gets to be. A German backpacker who detoured to see one of the country's larger lakes admitted on camera that he'd assumed lake meant something modest until he stood on a shore where he genuinely could not see the other side. Would you rather explore a smaller place you can fully map in a lifetime, or a bigger one you could spend that same lifetime only partially seeing? Money is where the story gets more complicated, and to its credit, a lot of the footage didn't shy away from that complexity. A hospitality worker in one host city spoke candidly with a traveling vlogger about hourly pay plus tips adding up to what she estimated at somewhere around $28 to $35 an hour during tournament week, numbers that stunned European visitors used to flatter, more regulated wage structures, even after accounting for the fact that healthcare and paid leave aren't guaranteed the same way. A small business owner near a stadium described how a single good tournament weekend could equal what used to take him a month to earn pre-pandemic, while also being candid that a bad flu season without insurance could wipe a chunk of that right back out. Home ownership came up too. An English couple was floored to learn what a family of 4 could rent for the price of a cramped flat back home in a major European city, while acknowledging that property taxes and insurance costs eat into that advantage more than people initially assume. This is the part of the video where nuance actually matters most. The takeaway several travelers landed on wasn't, "America is simply richer." It was, "The trade-offs are different, and depending on your life stage and risk tolerance, those trade-offs can look very good or very bad." That's a more honest story than either side of the usual online argument tends to admit. Patriotism might be the single most disorienting thing for European visitors, more than the food, more than the trucks, more than the highways. A Dutch fan described standing in a stadium for the national anthem and being visibly unsettled by just how many people around him were singing every word, hand over heart, without a trace of irony, because back home, that kind of unguarded public patriotism reads as slightly uncomfortable, even nationalist. A small-town host city outside the main tournament footprint became a minor viral moment after a group of traveling supporters filmed an entire main street decorated in flags for a 4th of July celebration that happened to overlap with the tournament, with locals treating both events as basically the same holiday. What several European travelers eventually admitted, once the initial discomfort faded, was that the patriotism wasn't really about the government or any particular policy. It functioned more like a shared identity, glue, holding together a country too big and too different, region to region, to hold together any other way. A Swedish journalist covering the tournament put it plainly in a piece that circulated widely. "The flag means something structurally different in a country this size than it does in a nation you can drive across in an afternoon." Food turned into its own recurring bit, mostly because portion culture refuses to make sense to a first-time visitor, no matter how many times they're warned about it in advance. A group of French fans ordered what they thought was a single meal at a diner and ended up with enough food, by their own count, for what would have been 3 separate courses back home. Tipping culture became a genuine point of friction and confusion. Several travelers described the mental math of figuring out 18 to 22% on top of an already large bill as its own kind of culture shock, distinct from the cost of the food itself. Drive-through culture got its own reaction reel too, with a German tourist filming the process of ordering, paying, and receiving food without ever leaving the car, as something that felt almost futuristic compared to how food service typically works at home.
3 American things that I miss the most as a Brit. I am a Brit who has spent months in America and now I'm back in the UK. I am having withdrawal symptoms from certain things, mate. Number 3. Okay, look, the flavours. I am missing the flavours, okay? Us Brits aren't used to flavouring and spices, right? My palate changed. I've come back to the UK and it's...
And more than one traveler admitted that regional food identity, Texas barbecue being nothing like Kansas City barbecue, being nothing like a Nashville hot chicken plate, genuinely surprised them. Since from the outside, American food gets flattened into one stereotype that doesn't hold up once you're actually eating your way across the country. Would you rather have smaller, simpler portions you can always finish, or bigger ones you'll be taking home in a box. By the final week of the tournament, a pattern had become impossible to ignore across dozens of independent creators who had never coordinated with each other. People who arrived with a script in their head about what America was going to be kept running into a country that refused to follow it. A Scottish supporter posted a video near the end of his trip that started, almost word for word, with an admission that he owed the country an apology for how confidently he'd repeated stereotypes he'd never actually tested. A German fan said something similar, that he'd expected to come home with content mocking the US, and instead came home recommending it to his own family. None of this means every stereotype was wrong, or that the country doesn't have real, serious problems that these same travelers acknowledged on camera in the same breath. The difference was that assumption got replaced by direct experience, and direct experience, more often than not, complicated the story in America's favor. So here's the actual question worth sitting with. Would you rather hold on to an assumption you've never tested, or risk having to admit in public, on camera, that you were wrong? Because that's exactly the position a huge number of Europeans found themselves in this summer, and most of them, to their credit, took it pretty well. If this kind of cultural contrast content is your thing, do us a favor like this video. Share it with someone who still thinks they've got America figured out from the outside, and subscribe with notifications on, because this series has a lot more ground left to cover. One last thing before you go. This video is a compilation drawn from public social media clips, travel vlogs, on-the-ground interviews, and general reporting around World Cup 2026, put together for entertainment and discussion purposes. It reflects individual experiences and reactions, not the full social, economic, or political reality of any country. And it isn't an endorsement or condemnation of any nation, government, or policy. Numbers referenced throughout are illustrative and drawn from a mix of traveler estimates and general reporting rather than a single verified source, so treat them as scene setting rather than as citable statistics. Nothing here should be read as investment, immigration, legal, or travel advice. And the decisions you make based on what you watch are entirely your own.